Welcome to Mormons, Mystics, and Muons. I'm Gabe, got Eldon here, and today we have Valentina with us, and we're going to talk about the Mormon priesthood and similarities between that and Reiki. So welcome to the podcast, Vale.
Thank you, Gabe. Thanks, guys. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you, Vale.
Thank you.
So, I want to give us a bit of an introduction of your story, and you can go into Reiki a little bit, but then after that, we'll talk a bit about the priesthood, which you're not that familiar with, Mormonism. So I won't spend too much time on it, but mainly interested in hearing about Reiki and then kind of discussing how the similarities between the two are.
Sure. Okay, so where do I start? Well, my name is Valentina. As you can probably hear from my accent, I'm from Italy. I'm currently living in Italy right now. And I would say until I was 26 years old, my life was very normal for Italian standards. And I am an only child, which is quite common here in Italy. I lived with my parents for 26 years because even when we go to university here in Italy, we live with our parents. So I was used to a lot of stability, and everything changed, I would say, when I moved to London when I was 26. And I moved there because my boyfriend at the time got a job in London, and I decided to follow him. And that experience, that decision really changed my whole life. It didn't work with my boyfriend, but I decided to stay in London. And there really I opened my mind in ways that I couldn't imagine possible. I was meeting people from all over the world and with different background, different stories. So I was able to see that people they had different beliefs, different values, different ways to dealing with things. And that really, really changed my perspective on everything. And also, for me, was the first time that I had to deal with a lot of changes. So I lived in London for 8 years. And in those 8 years, I changed 7 houses, 4 jobs, many different friends, because London is a place that if you're not from there, people come, stay a couple of years, and then they leave to get some experience, and they go back to their country or somewhere else. So it was a lot of instability for me. And as I said, for 26 years, I lived with my parents. I had the same friends. I lived in the same city. So I was really struggling to deal with all these things. And what I realized is that many other people that were my friends there actually were perfectly fine with the changes. For example, I remember when I moved out from my boyfriend's house, I moved in with some flatmates that I didn't know. So they became my friends. But after a few months, the owner of the house decided to sell it. And I remember panicking. Like I couldn't sleep at night. I was completely in panic. And I remember all of my other roommates were, of course, they were annoyed, but they were calm, and they just took some actions to find another place to live. So I could see that there was another way to deal with things. And I wanted to learn that. So there was a time where I had to change house, the job. I lost many of my friends. So it was all at the same time. And I realized that I wanted to find some stability within me, regardless what was happening around me. So what I knew at that point was therapy. So I decided to go to therapy for a couple of years. And at the same time, a friend of mine told me very randomly about meditation. He said, "Oh, you should try. I am using it and I can focus much better when I study." So I decided to try just out of curiosity. And I think probably more meditation than therapy really helped me. I could focus much more. I was able to observe my thoughts and my emotions, and then don't react, but just observe them, and then pause for a moment, and then take the best action. So I really was, yeah, I was feeling much better, much more centered. And this was for a couple of years, this therapy and meditation together. So after a couple of years, my mental health was in a much better state. But I and I was able to deal with changes in a much better way too. I had more resilience for sure. But even if I was feeling much better, there was still something that wasn't working for me. In fact, there was there was I remember for a few months in a row, I was getting sick very easily. Once or twice a month, I was getting fever or cough or cold. I had to stay home from work, and for me it was weird because I never, had better health in the past. So um, at that point, my mental health was better. As I said, I was eating quite healthily. I was exercising, but there was still something missing. So I wanted to find something that was natural, not didn't want to take any medicine or anything like that. I wanted to find a natural remedy for improve my immune system. And I remembered randomly, then I know nothing is random, but that my mom had a book um, about Reiki. So when I went back to Italy to visit my parents, I asked my mom about the book, and I started to read it. And one of the benefits was really strengthening your immune system. And it really seemed something that the thing that I was looking for. I wasn't fully believing in it, and I didn't know anyone that actually tried it. My mom read the book, but never took any training or never tried it. So I couldn't ask anyone. But again, out of curiosity, I booked a session when I went back to London from a lovely lady that was living nearby, actually. And I booked 3 sessions because this is what a full Reiki cycle is. This is what she told me, at least. And I remember after the first session, I was actually not feeling much during the session. I had shivers, but I thought, it's November, so it's cold. Of course, I'm cold. And then after the first session, when I went back home, I think a couple of hours later, I started to cry like crazy. And at the beginning, I didn't connect it to Reiki. I thought maybe, I don't know, I'm tired. Maybe it was the colleague at work that did something and I didn't process it very well. But this happened all the other times that I went to this Reiki session with this lady. So I asked her, and she said that was the purpose of the Reiki session. So release stuck emotions, so emotions that we didn't process, and that's why they were coming up like that. So after that, I started to believe in it, and also I was feeling also much lighter. So I decided to learn it, to do it on myself. And well, I can explain maybe later if you want, but there are 3 levels of Reiki. And the first one is they teach you how to do Reiki hands-on and to family and friends. The second level is you get attuned to some Reiki symbols and you can do distant Reiki, and the third level you become a Reiki master and teacher, so you can teach Reiki to other people too. So I started with the first level, and I really found my health really improved. But I think what did most than anything else was really improving, pushing my spiritual growth, and I can explain later maybe more about it.
So yeah,
So
when in your real quick childhood, were you raised in any religion, and how would you describe like your spiritual outlook, or what did you feel like the purpose of life was?
So, as long as I can remember, the questions that I was asking myself were, who am I and why am I here? But I couldn't find any answers in the culture and belief systems of the people around me. So I grew up in Italy, and we have the Pope. So the religion, like Christian Catholic, is, even if we don't go to church that much, even my generation especially, is still in the culture, is still strong. So but I knew that the religion wasn't answering my questions. There was something that didn't add up for me, so
Because you
I
hadn't met the Mormons. That's like as like Mormons focus a lot. We had a video of like, who am I, where am I going, or why did I come here, where am I going? Like this video is all about that, and that's it's not just Mormons that ask that question, but that's
Mhm.
kind of, as a missionary in the Mormon church, and as a Mormon, you sort of feel like you have the answer to this. But it's funny because in Mormonism, I think, has a decent answer to it, but as I discovered, there's a lot of other very good answers too. So I'm just
Mhm.
joking, but
Yeah, no, I think the first answers, or at least some of the answer that I was looking for, I found them for the first time when I was studying um, philosophy in high school. So those philosophers were asking themselves the same questions, first of all, and then some of them were, giving some of their ideas. So they were
were there
answering
any
something.
ones in particular that you like remember or resonated with? This
I'll
is
try
Eldon's
to remember
territory
the.
too, more than
Yeah, I'll
mine.
try the. I will definitely mix them up, but all the Greeks and the first ones that I studied. So the Greeks, the Romans were the one that were closer to my ideas of why we are here. Yeah.
I remember when I was at college, BYU, I took a philosophy class, and we read Alfred North Whitehead. Have you read much of him, Eldon, or heard of
No.
him?
Yeah, I've definitely heard of him, read a little bit, and seen some interviews, but nothing extensive about him from him.
Yeah, philosophy is definitely not my forte, but I remember reading him, and just like my mind being blown open. And also, either in the class or because of the class, I read Plato's Republic. And I remember really being fascinated by this stuff, particularly Plato's cave allegory. And then I just pieced this together recently, but like after that was when I had this big faith crisis the summer after that
Mm.
Hmm.
class in college, and I hadn't drawn the connection. But how about your? Go ahead, Eldon.
Well, my question for Vale is: Does Reiki have answers to those questions? Is there a philosophy behind Reiki that answers or has reason for existence in those things? I'm not
Yeah.
all that familiar with Reiki.
Yeah. So Reiki, when the courses, the training has also some theory, and the theory gave me some explanations. And yeah, definitely. Even the word itself, Reiki. So Rei means universal consciousness, spirit, source, whatever you want to call it, and Ki means life force energy. So when you put them together, it means spiritual life force. The word Ki is called in many other different cultures in different ways. For example, prana in India or Qi in China. So it's very well known in Asia, Eastern countries. And but the explanation of what Reiki is from the textbooks and also my Reiki teachers was making sense to me. In fact, Reiki means really the reunion between the individual energy, which is Ki, and the spirit, the universal consciousness, the energy of the universe, which is Rei. So this definition is really based on the assumption that there is a single energy that encompasses every living beings, like minerals, animals, plants, and that all form of life that are not separate, but they are actually all interconnected. So some might call it oneness. And through a Reiki session, the flow of this energy through you, you start to remember this information, and you start to remember that you're not isolated, you're not an island, but you are part of something bigger. You are a cell in a bigger body that is called universe. And so Reiki really accelerates this understanding, and is kind of helping you to reconnecting different parts of you, also the parts that we ignore, reject, or or repress, so you become whole. In fact, the verb to heal has the same root as the word whole, WHOLE, and the same word holy. So my Reiki master was saying, when you integrate all of your parts, even the one that you don't want to see, you'd reject, or you repress, you then become holy. Basically, that was the theory behind. So this is not just for Reiki, is any form of energy healing. This is what they're based off.
Real quick, and then we'll go more into Reiki, but especially since you both have basically similar life trajectories, why don't you tell us a bit about career-wise, where you were and where you are
Sure.
now and how you switched?
Yeah, so in my story, I think I stopped at Reiki. So after the Reiki training, few months after, the pandemic started. And as many of us, we had a lot of time to think because we couldn't do anything else. And so I really realized at the point that what I was doing, so I was working in finance in London in the investments, financial markets. I realized that wasn't my thing anymore. I just couldn't do it anymore. But the problem was that I didn't know what else to do. And the reason why I chose finance was because already back then, when I was younger, I didn't know what to do. And my main goal was becoming independent as soon as possible. And in Italy, there were not many jobs, but I knew that we're hiring in financial companies, investments, banks, things like that. So that's why I chose actually finance and financial markets. I didn't mind it, but after a few years, I knew that that wasn't the thing. And with the pandemic, it became almost unbearable for me to work there. So what I did was hiring a coach. And she was specialized, if we can call it like that, to helping you find your purpose in life, your dharma. And I hired her. I worked with her for 3 months, and after 3 months, I had a clear idea of who I was, what I came here to do. I didn't have the details, but I knew it was something related to spirituality, and I knew, it could have been something, holistic practices like what I already loved, like meditation and Reiki. And then I remember in my company, the big bosses were a bit desperate because after a year of the pandemic, people were really struggling working from home. Maybe they had kids, maybe they were away from their families. So their mental health wasn't in a good shape. So they asked if someone had some ideas on how to make them feel better. And after all the meditation I did and Reiki and all the work that I did with my coach, I volunteered and I said that I was willing to try to help at least. So for 4 months, I led meditations. I did some, make my colleagues do some journaling, gratitude lists, and all these kind of things. And I never felt so fulfilled in my life. And for the first time, also, I wasn't a number there because I always worked for very big companies where many of us were just a number. And for the first time, people were actually seeing me. So I really realized that I wanted to do something like that for the rest of my life. So I think after 6 months of my 6 months of my discovery that is what I wanted to do, I left my safe job and jumped into the unknown to do what I do now. Initially, I started just with meditation and Reiki, and then I was very fascinated by the subconscious mind and how it works. So I found a coaching certification that was explaining a lot of tools to help you to work on the subconscious mind. So I took that certification that lasted 6 months, and I realized while I was practicing that coaching was the thing that I wanted to do, and I could use Reiki and meditation in it too. So it was, really, my calling, if we can call it like that. Yeah.
Which is, it's funny because you were at Vanguard too,
Oh yeah.
and it's such a kind of a poetic irony. Vanguard's viewed by maybe the more conspiratorial dichotomous thinking as like the heart of the cabal that's running the evil forces behind it. So it's funny that just that transition that you made from having a master's in finance to being a Reiki master.
Yeah.
From numbers to...
Yeah, it was a big change, but I feel much more comfortable doing what I'm doing now than what I was doing before. Finance, so it's much more natural for me. So yeah,
that's so inspiring for people to hear, I think, Vale, because I venture a guess that there are a lot of people right now that have found themselves in working careers or situations that were maybe given to them in a provisional life, where you're guided toward opportunities or things come up and you're kind of moving along, especially as a younger person. You end up in a place where maybe you've got some skill, maybe you've got some abilities, but at the end of the day, you do feel like a number. And I think to be seen and to be able to fully express yourself, and I love the word dharma that you use, to be able to find the purpose that you have. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's inspiring, and I hope anybody who listens to this, can use Vale's story as one more little talisman of courage to make that kind of a change. I've made changes myself recently that have been a lot of very similar, into the unknown, and still unknown largely. But that feeling, that inner voice that guides, that inner self that assures that you're on the right track, I think is worth listening to. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that.
You both stepped away from, you both were in finance, and you stepped away from financial security to at least a period of question mark there. I guess what goes through your minds, and why did you take that leap? What were you following? I guess Vale first, if you want to.
Well, for me, was such a knowing that that is what I wanted to do. And even logically, I was thinking, okay, if I want to keep this job in finance and if I want to still work here, before I can retire, this was my thinking, before I can retire is at least other 30 years if I'm lucky, if we will ever have pensions. So maybe I can just take a couple of years to try to do something that I really love and I'm passionate about. And then worst case, I can always go back to where I was coming from. So this is what gave me the strength to try. I said, I want to try now. And if it doesn't work, I can always go back to an office. Yeah.
I love that. Even looking at it logically like that, a career, if you maintain your health, can be a really long time. And taking a risk maybe earlier in that career to make a big pivot or trajectory change could pay off tremendously. And, the future is still yet to be seen so much on my decision to make a change. I was in financial services for about 16 years. I'm very proud of the work I did in that space and worked with a lot of wonderful people, helped many, many people make better and good financial decisions, and feel like, I could always maybe have a soft landing back in that space if it came to it. But in the process of my awakening, which I haven't divulged too much on this podcast, maybe we'll do an episode with a little more detail. In the process of my own kind of awakening and gnosis experience, a lot of it was actually just remembering and recalling from my childhood or from my younger years what it is that really feels true to me. And I think I worked myself into a space where so much of it was maybe not authentic to my past experience. And so I had to realign what I was doing in that dharma, that day-to-day duty. I do believe that wherever someone stands in this entire orchestra of existence, that there can be value, that there can be worth, that there can be like a kind of a dharma approach, that it can be fulfilling and that it can meet the requirements for, a rich life. But I, at the same time, also think that there's better that with the risk of stepping out into the authenticity, hopefully that that you have a much better chance of having that richness. So, yeah.
It's interesting. You both talk about remembering, and as you and I have talked, Vale, you strongly emphasize that when you went through your awakening, you weren't learning things, you were remembering things, which wasn't so, I don't know that I describe it quite the same myself, but that's an experience a lot of people have. And it's funny because your experience, how you describe things do have these parallels, like Mormon theology Mormon theology is very similar to the kind of the soul contracts and the choosing your life, and you came down here for a purpose. It's just all got their own wrapper on it. In Mormonism, you came down here to get a physical body, whereas in kind of spirituality, you came down here to get a human experience. And there's this, you had a pre-existence or a premortal existence. Spirituality, it's like past lives or whatever you want to call it. But then there's this veil of forgetting to make this test actually a test. And then if you pass it, you go back and you become a god, which is so similar to spirituality. But yeah, the way you talk about it, this remembering, it's the same, and this veil. It's so many similarities. And also, it's interesting that your story involves a book from your mom and involves connecting. Things that when we've talked previously, I think you've talked about things that you've always felt were true from your childhood. Then you finally found evidence for it. Sort of similar to mine, where as a kid, I don't know what age, but my mom, who was always more into like woo stuff, kind of balanced science and spirituality, she had given me the Celestine Prophecy because somebody had given that to her, and I read it and I loved it, and I thought, this is amazing, fascinating. And I thought it was nonfiction because it's written as like a fictional story, and even in or a nonfiction story, but it's a fictional kind of allegory parable. Even in the back of the book, it talks about like exercises for seeing your aura and like holding your fingers up. And I was doing these things, and then somehow I learned it was fiction, and I equated that in my mind as being not true, and I felt kind of cheated and lied to, and then I swung the other way, very skeptical and rational. And then it wasn't until like a year and a half when I was having all these very insightful changes that processing with my mom, and she's like, I think you need to go read the Celestine Prophecy again. And I read it, and it kind of play as it was happening in real time in my life. It was fascinating. So this is interesting, the parallels. Do you want to real quick talk at all about any of the kind of awakening moments through your process? The one experience you shared with me about the roots, or anything that as you look back, you realize like, oh, these were like downloads, or these were moments when I was connecting to something higher.
Yeah. So that was even before I started meditating, but because I was living in London and I was finding myself, I was finding, what I liked, what I didn't like. Nobody of my family was around, nobody of my old friends was around, so I could really do whatever I wanted. And that gave me so much freedom and then so much happiness. And I remember one night I was with some friends after work, and I had an amazing night. I was really happy with them. People from all over the world, really sharing stories, really my ideal life, my ideal friends. And I remember I was so happy that walking from where I was to the underground station in London, I had a moment where I saw, and I thought I was imagining at that point, and now I could say I saw through my third eye some roots growing into the ground deeper and deeper. And then the deeper they were going, the more I was able to move the city. It's always difficult to describe these things, but I was turning left and the city was moving as I wanted. So the message was, you can actually create the life that you want. You can deal with your reality. You can create your reality. But I got the message, but I couldn't really put everything together at that point, and I thought I was just imagining it. And now I could say, because I was vibrating so high, I saw through my third eye that the more I grow my roots with my from my root chakra, the more I'm able to, actually also, create the life that I want. But yeah, I realized what was happening to me years later when I started to study all these things. And that was just one of the experience also. Yeah, I heard voices, and sometimes I thought they were just my thoughts. But then when I feel pressure in my upper heart chakra, now I know that is what some people call higher self or intuition or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I learned this language later, and I had the experience before. Yeah.
And people are critical of, I was, critical of these words, energy and chakras and whatever. But there's such hubris in that because we don't realize, because, this is often criticism from a materialistic perspective that, like, that's not what science says. There's no way that could be true with matter. And so there's this skepticism, but really I find the skepticism doesn't go deep enough, and we aren't skeptical of the things that, we assume as truths. We don't realize that language, everything that we call, language, words, these are all constructs. These are arbitrary boxes that we draw around a world that is continuous, and there aren't lines around it. And these models are not necessarily compatible with each other, depending on the scope of the model. But then there are also models that actually are compatible and kind of tie everything together.
Yeah. Yeah, in my case was I experienced things before, and then after I read, even just meditation, for example, I could feel myself in a different way. I was different. I was reacting in a different way. But I didn't know anything about meditation. I didn't start meditation because I wanted to reach alignment. I just started it because I wanted to feel better. And so after I experienced all these benefits on myself, I started to read about meditation, and all the scientific researches were confirming exactly the same benefits that I was experiencing it. So I totally believed it, and I started to share with everyone. So I would say, oh, it's not just me. It's just something that people can experience if they try. And the same with Reiki. So my approach, I think, with all of this was starting with curiosity and maybe also a bit of desperation, because I really wasn't doing great when I started to do these things. But with curiosity, be open-minded. I wasn't believing in Reiki at all, but after experiencing it, I then believed in it and start to put things together and take courses, know the theory. So to me, is everything that I teach or use in my coaching is because I tried it on myself, and I am my own scientific experiment.
I love that. Yeah, the yourself being a scientific experiment, and I love that you're sharing these stories and what you've experienced, Vale, because I think that what's one thing that may not be apparent is people anciently, let's say, so much of the words you used have been from Hindu or Buddhism or other Eastern traditions, chakra and dharma and third eye, these things which are much more known and discussed and part of life in Eastern traditions, in the Eastern part of the other part of the world, in Asia, India, these places where anciently, before scientific tools of measurement and a lot of scientific views of the world, people used a language that they developed to describe what they were experiencing, which holds true for us today as humans in this experience. And so adopting that language from, those terms and stuff seems very natural as you study it and look into it. Because, like, for me, the word chakra at one point had a meaning that was, a Gentile religious artifact, meaning this is something from another part of the world, from a cultural part of the world that humans developed that isn't from God. Because my upbringing in Mormonism was that Mormonism was the valid life path, and all others were either a counterfeit or just not valid until subsumed. All other cultures weren't valid until subsumed into Mormonism. And so to adopt that language and to have those words that have meaning to you specifically because you have found the answers inside, someone gave you, or through your study and your research, you found language to clothe it in.
Yeah.
Those could be different words. They could be said differently, different accents in different places, but the consistency across the human experience. In other words, ancient people knew what life was about and what this oneness that is before us is. And we could find evidence of that through all time.
And this is what I say. Yeah, exactly. So this is what I say to everyone when I do Reiki sessions or teach meditation or whatever. Like, I'm not discovering anything new here. I'm just, taking very ancient practices and maybe modernizing them with, they can be used also in our life these days. But I'm not discovering anything new here. Is all already written in those sacred books in Asia, and if someone wants answers, all the answers are already there. So it's just that I didn't have any access before to that, so I didn't study these things. And as you said, I had experience before, and those cultures gave me the language to express it. But as you said, it could be any other language. And I know many people get triggered by the word chakra, aura, God, but you can call them whatever you like. But the important thing is you know what you're talking about because you experienced them, or you can explain it.
Definitely.
I was thinking about Alma 32 as we talked about. Well, I guess one thing that I find interesting in all of our stories, and I think in awakening or spiritual development stories in general, is that they are generally accompanied with an ego death, ego being defined as like what you identify yourself with. Like mine was identified or correlated with moving cross country and big career changes and separation, divorce, and all these, basically everything that I had defined myself by. Once that's taken from you, you're kind of free to redefine things. Or some people do that in like a slow arc, but others are kind of forced to do that because they resist it for so long. And you both have kind of similar stories that, through breakups or COVID or health struggles or whatnot, there's some moment where what you've been doing doesn't work anymore. And you have to kind of go back to the drawing board. And it was just making me think of, so Vale, the Book of Mormon is kind of a foundational text for Mormonism. It's essentially, through my perspective, kind of a channeled automatic writing piece that Joseph Smith produced. But there's this chapter in it that, even though I don't believe it as historical, and it doesn't, I don't find, have a lot of like non-dual or esoteric teachings like maybe A Course in Miracles or other channeled works have. There's still a lot of things that were meaningful to me and I think are still well said there. And there's this one chapter that talks a lot about faith, and it's one of the prophets. He's talking about these people that are really poor and they were kicked out of the synagogues. So it's just interesting. There's a couple of verses that I thought kind of parallel, what we're talking about. It says, Therefore, blessed are they who humble themselves without being compelled to be humble, or rather, in other words, blessed is he that believeth in the word of God and is baptized without stubbornness of heart, yea, without being brought to know the word, or even compelled to know before they will believe. Now, I don't believe that there's like a priority, or that you get any extra points, or that it's more ideal to have a slow progression versus like a complete transformation. So I disagree with that, but I think it's still talking about this phenomenon of, rapid spiritual growth and change when you're kind of compelled to be humbled or this ego death. But he talks about faith, like the development of faith. And when you were talking about the reason why you started believing Reiki, he describes this prophet in the Book of Mormon. He says, as I said concerning faith, that it was not a perfect knowledge, even so it is with my words. You cannot know of a surety at first unto perfection any more than faith is a perfect knowledge. If you will awake and arouse your faculties, even to an experiment upon my words, and exercise a particle of faith, yea, even if you can no more than desire to believe, let that desire work in you, even until you believe in a manner that you can give place for a portion of my words. Now we will compare the word unto a seed. If you give place that a seed may be planted in your heart, behold, if it be a true seed or a good seed, if you do not cast it out by your unbelief, that you will resist the Spirit of the Lord, behold, it will begin to swell within your breasts, and you feel these swelling motions, which is interesting. It's very similar to what you talked about. Mormonism, they talk about this burning of the bosom, but, it's not unique to, all these different traditions have their own way of calling things. You will begin to say within yourselves, it must needs be that this is a good seed, or that the word is good, for it beginneth to enlarge my soul, yet beginneth to enlighten my understanding. That's interesting in reference to enlightenment. Yet it began to be delicious unto me. Now behold, would this not increase your faith? I say unto you, yea, nevertheless, it has not grown up to a perfect knowledge. Behold, as the seed sprouteth and beginneth to grow. And he just talks about kind of the progression. So, that's within the context of like faith and Christianity and whatnot. But it's interesting because it's the same process that you're talking about, that, you didn't know these things, but you didn't really have any option. You didn't cast it out by your unbelief. You're like, I'm going to try this. And then it worked for you. And then you're like, okay, I believe in this because it's worked. And then you've kind of just followed the breadcrumbs from there.
Yeah. Be open-minded, I think, is the key to awaken.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the other key is action. Something I found and that your story supports is that feelings follow actions. And if you're feeling a certain way, if you're feeling a way that you don't like, you weren't feeling happy, you weren't feeling fulfilled, you were feeling that like this can't be it, 30-year career from here, it's just not what you yearn for, then you took action, learning about meditation, opening your mind to new information, maybe information that you previously had stereotypical ideas about, or just taking that leap of faith into the darkness, into the unknown, handling the fear that comes up, because fear is the unknown. Fear is simply the unknown. Once it's known, the fear is gone. So stepping into it, turning on the light, taking the action, and then seeing the fruit of it. That's the essence of Joseph's words in the Book of Mormon there of Alma 32, but it's your own experience. And I felt that also, just the feelings follow actions. If you don't feel good and you want to feel better, find an action that can help you. And it's a good reminder for myself. I often don't feel good, or I have reasons not to feel good. And it's hard to be motivated to take action to improve it.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get a little more into the specifics of like priesthood and the comparison to Reiki. So we'll go quickly over just the idea of priesthood, or the authority that Mormonism claims within itself. So this is Mormon's website, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints website. It says priesthood ordinances. So essentially, Now I'll just read this. Priesthood ordinances are sacred acts given by the Lord, performed by the authority of the priesthood. Priesthood blessings are given by the authority of the priesthood for healing, comfort, and encouragement. Brethren who perform ordinances and blessings should prepare themselves by living according to gospel principles and striving to be guided by the Holy Spirit. They should perform each ordinance and blessing in a dignified manner and comply with the following requirements. The ordinance should be performed in the name of Jesus Christ, performed by the authority of the priesthood, performed with any necessary procedures such as specified words or using consecrated oil, authorized by the designated priesthood leader who holds the proper keys if necessary. So essentially, one of the tenets of Mormonism, because Mormonism believes that there's this throughout times in history, God's church, which has this proper authority given by God to do things in his name here. That comes at different times, and then people fall away from it. Christ restored it. He gave this authority to his apostles. And then there's this apostasy people. This authority was lost. And then Joseph Smith was called as a prophet to restore it. And part of this, and I don't know all the dates, but through the foundational periods of the church, Joseph Smith claims there's a lesser priesthood. So this priesthood of the Aaronic priesthood, named after Aaron, Moses's brother, that you can baptize people with and kind of perform communion with. And he says that he and another leader of the church, that John the Baptist appeared to him, put his hands on their head, and ordained them, which in a Reiki would be attunement, ordained them, gave them this authority through a physical act, so that they could baptize each other. And then there's this higher level. It's kind of interesting now that I'm thinking about there's these different levels of Reiki, that Peter, James, and John had this higher priesthood, and they showed up physically, laid their hands on Joseph Smith, and gave him this authority, and that this is the authority by which he could do these things. And the church still has it today, because when you get ordained, it's done by the laying on of hands. Only men in the church have it. When you get ordained, often you get this, I forget what this lineage, where you can see, it was given by this person to this person, which is funny because it's the same thing in Reiki, but it goes all the way back to Joseph Smith and then Peter, James, and John. And there's some in the history, there is some evidence that these weren't really well documented experiences, and seems likely or suspicious that these were kind of made up after the fact, or which I think to me makes sense, that as you go through these awakenings, or have psychedelic experiences or mystical experiences, they're hard to you're piecing things together because they rock your world or your paradigms. And I see a lot of that in early Mormonism, where things change from moment to moment and they develop and they grow. And so I think it's likely that he realized we need to have this in the church, or feels threatened by other people that are having mystical experiences and needs a way to kind of cement authority, and then goes back and kind of writes these in. But it's funny because there are so many similarities to Reiki. I guess anything else in terms of Mormonism and the priesthood? So only men can have it.
Yeah, I would add that it really is foundational to the entire institution. It's a requisite of the institution's validity, because you need the ordinances to obtain eternal life. You need the ordinances through the institution of the church, because the priesthood is the claimed authority to administer the institution. So it's this little bit of a logic path that says it basically says only through the church's, specifically the Mormon church's authority, is eternal life attainable. And so it is this priesthood that's required, which is when, in discussions with believing full believing members of the church, I find that it often eventually may lead back to this church has the authority from God, which is for its institutional survival, which I think with the emphasis on the restoration of the priesthood and the ordinances, I think really wasn't fleshed out by Joseph Smith before his death. And I believe that the institution has put more emphasis on those connections to kind of cement its need in the world.
Yeah, and we'll let you contrast with your story of Reiki in a moment, because I know you're not too interested in how Mormons claim to have the authority. But I guess the last few things I would say that are of interest and maybe parallels to Reiki, even though men have the priesthood in the church, like in the early church, women would give blessings. So blessings for healing in the church. There's some ritual aspect to it. They have oil that they've kind of done a ceremony over. They've consecrated it, and then they put that on the person's head, and then they kind of do this 2-part blessing. But in the early church, like women, there's accounts of women giving blessings, and even in like the early 1900s. I don't know if you're aware of this, Eldon, but I remember on my mission reading Answers to Gospel, reading Joseph Fielding Smith, maybe one of the early mid 1900 prophets that would have these books that answered questions. And there were questions about whether Aaronic priesthood holders could be in the ordinances, participate in the ordinances that require the Melchizedek priesthood, ordinations, or even women. And at that time, women were allowed to like stand in on different types of blessings, which is sounds very progressive. So it's interesting that is not commonly known to a lot of people today.
That was the mid 1900s?
Yeah, mid or early 1900s, like specifically one of the more conservative prophets was like, they're not, it's their faith that is acting as they participate in these ceremonies. But I guess the last thing, personally, I didn't have a lot of powerful spiritual experiences in the church, but blessings were one of the few things that I actually did see work. When I was fairly young, 5, 6, 7 or something, I had cut my eye with a knife because I was impatient, waiting for my mom to get some scissors. So I decided to go into the kitchen and get a little paring knife. And I, pulled it towards my eye because I was cutting something, and then it like went through it and it went into my eyeball. And I remember went to the hospital. Apparently I was asleep. So I was told the story, but the missionaries came and they gave me a blessing, priesthood blessing, and said that, by my faith, I would be healed or whatever. And after I woke up, I told my mom that I was going to be able to see again because I couldn't see out of that eye. And then, things healed in a way that the doctor was kind of perplexed by. And I can see out of that eye pretty fine. And then I've also, like, even on my mission, several occasions where like I was sick or somebody else was sick and got a priesthood blessing. And very shortly after that felt better. And it was interesting as I was talking to my mom about some of these Reiki and kind of the principles behind it, this idea of like channeling energy through the crown of your head and then it coming out your arms. She was like, oh yeah, that's what I would just innately visualize when I would give you guys blessings because we didn't have a priesthood holder in my house. And she was fairly connected and had different kind of precognitive experiences and these healing things, several stories of it working. So it's interesting that she innately kind of was doing what you're going to describe Reiki does. So yeah, that's your lesson in Mormon priesthood. Why don't you tell us about the history of Reiki and like what similarities you see not being exposed to Mormonism?
Yeah, one thing I want to say is Reiki is just one of the many, many energy healing modalities. And even if you will hear from some other type of energy healing, I'm sure you will find some similarities to what your mom was describing to you. And I think this way was discovered and developed to spread it to everyone, so everyone could actually access to this. But I'm pretty sure that in the future, everyone will be able to channel energy in their own way without following the Reiki Usui method or other ways that are available now. So I think it's just in our natural abilities to do this. And Reiki is just one of the many modalities available. And basically, it's a gentle way to healing through the human energy field. This is how I call the aura, not to trigger people, and to help with physical, mental, emotional, and spirit in all this level, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual level. It helps with relaxation, stress relief, better sleep, detoxification of the body. It definitely strengthens the immune system. It pushes your spiritual growth. So it really promotes an overall balance of your being. This is the definition, let's say. So I mentioned before the meaning of Rei and Ki. More practically, I can say that the theory behind is that good health is to maintain good health, we need Ki, so our life force energy to flow through us freely. But this doesn't happen sometimes because of our poor diet, or we don't exercise enough, or stress and tension. Some energy gets stuck in the body, and in the long term it can develop some sort of disease or illness. This is the theory behind. So what Reiki does is going and releasing this stuck energy, so the self-healing power of your body can come back to life, basically, can work again. And for example, one thing that I like to say is that Reiki go on the root cause of things. And often, for example, we repress emotions because nobody ever taught us how to handle them, how to deal with them, how to process them. So we repress emotion, especially the bad ones, the one that sadness, anger, and emotion means energy in motion. So it's simply energy that moves through your body. And if you repress it, it gets stuck somewhere. So, for example, if you have stomachache, and this is due to bottle up anger, what Reiki will do is will go and release this anger, and the stomachache will disappear. So that's why, for example, in my story, when I shared it before, I was going home and I was crying because sadness or whatever other emotion was stuck in me, and it was releasing at that point. And that's also why I share in my sessions as well, whatever emotion is coming up during those sessions, and this is very often what happens with people, just it means that it is ready to be released. People cry, laugh, some scream. So this is how I usually explain Reiki in a more practical way. Maybe the priesthood is really similar to not when you so is when you get attuned. So when then you are able to provide Reiki to others. And how it works is you become a channel. You become a channel for Reiki. Reiki is flowing through you and is going to the client, the receiver. And one thing that my teachers always say, of course, you have to keep your channel clean, so have a healthy lifestyle, meditate, move your body, eat well, but also the effects of the session depends also on how much the person is open to receive. This is what they say often. So there are no side effects to it, so it can only do good, and is used as a complementary treatment in for also more heavy disease. Like is used now in hospitals in the oncology department because is helping the patient to deal emotionally with the disease better, and also he alleviates the side effects of the disease, for example. So those are all things that Reiki can help with, but it is important to say that it's a complementary treatment. So is you can do it together with some Western medicine solutions as well.
How about the history of Reiki with Usui?
Yeah, so the one that I teach and I practice is the Usui method, and there are many other branches of Reiki, but this is, let's say, the original one. So Reiki was discovered and developed at the beginning of the 1900s, and from a Japanese man that was called Mikao Usui. And since he was a kid, he was very interested in holistic practices, energy healing, and they were quite developed in that part of the world. One of his favorite was called Kiko, that included some meditation, breathing, movements similar to Tai Chi, but also included techniques for healing through the laying on hands, so hands-on. How it was working was that Kiko required the practitioner to build up his energy through different exercise like breathing and movements, and then the energy of the practitioner was passing to the receiver. But what he was doing, this was basically the practitioner was feeling depleted and very tired after those sessions. And so Usui had this intuition. He also knew that history and sacred books were full of saint, mystics, or shamans that were able to heal other people, and drawing this energy from an inexhaustible source. And he had this intuition that everyone could do that. So he started this quest to trying to find a way to do that. And he went everywhere in Asia, Japan, China, Tibet. He arrived also in Europe. He also studied different subjects like philosophy, medicine, how to develop psychic abilities, for example. But the more he was studying, the more he was feeling like a chef with the most sophisticated recipes, but he didn't have the ingredients yet. So what actually changed everything is when he decided to become a monk, and he went to a retreat on a sacred mountain near Kyoto, and he fasted and meditated for 21 days. And at the end of his retreat, he described it as a big light coming through his head. Now I would call it probably crown chakra. And he was attuning his entire being to this energy. Then he would call then later Reiki. And after that, he found his healing ability greatly enhanced. In fact, they speak about 4 miracles after he came back from that retreat. The first one was able to eat with comfort a very big meal, and after 21 days fasting, it was surprising. He also stubbed his toe, and he healed it immediately, just placing his hands on it. He healed a Buddhist monk or a Zen monk from arthritis as well, as soon as he came back from there. And also he healed a woman from toothache. So he was so excited about this discovery that he decided to open a school shortly after and moved to Tokyo, open a school to treat clients, but also to teach Reiki to other people. And one of the students was a doctor called Kujuro Ayashi. They also then opened a school in Tokyo, and this person is important because he was the one that actually taught Reiki to a lady called Awayo Takata, that she was a Japanese woman that was living in Hawaii, and she was flying back. Going back. I don't know how they were moving these days, but going back to Japan to have a treatment for a Gabler disease, I think it's called in English. Anyway, he needed to have surgery, but she got to know this Ayashi clinic, and she decided to get treatments there, and she healed completely. So of course she wanted to learn it, and so she spent some time with Ayashi, and after the training she decided to go back to the Y and open a school there. And this is how Reiki got to America and the Western culture. And yeah, so this is the summary of the story.
And then what is actually giving or receiving Reiki involve?
Mm-hmm. So when you receive Reiki, the most common sensations would be tingling all over your body. You might have change of temperature of your body. You can feel maybe waves of heat, or how happened to me, shivers everywhere. Emotions might come up. Many people cry, as I said, laugh, scream, whatever they need to release. Also, you might I don't know how to say in English. When you're hungry, your stomach makes some noise. This
Growls,
is also
rumbling.
so that also very, very common. And also people, this is during the session. People that maybe have clairvoyant, very developed, might see visions, might see things, colors as well. Violet is very common, which is associated to the seventh chakra. And there are many benefits. People fall asleep during the session, which is perfectly fine. For example, I had many different stories that I could tell you. For example, I remember both of my parents had knee pain, and I remember as soon as I learned Reiki, I did some Reiki on their knee, and it disappeared immediately. Or, people were able to fall asleep after months and months that they couldn't sleep. They're when I used to do in-person healing. Now I do more on distant energy healing. So when I do that, it's over Zoom usually, and there are people and animals also around them. And I remember also some of the cats in their apartment healed because they had a flu or something like that. So there are many benefits, and also it's difficult to say what it's going to do for you, because Reiki will go and heal whatever is most needed at that time. So it's an intelligent energy.
And what is it? What does it look like? I mean, are you putting your hands on them?
So
Like, what's
yeah,
the variation?
in the in-person treatment, you put your hands on the person's body. You don't touch. You can stay a few centimeters away, and is usually a rebalancing of their chakras. So here there could be an explanation about chakras, but there are 7 main chakras. So Reiki works directly with those chakras, and also the aura. And so a treatment usually lasts 1 hour in person, and distant is, at least this is what they taught me. I can see benefits also after 20 minutes of treatment. Yeah.
And so then there's these 3 levels where level 1, you can do it on yourself and other people. Level 2 is distance Reiki. Level 3, then at level 3, you're considered a Reiki master, which means that you can attune other people and you don't need any approval from there's no centralized Reiki authority.
No, absolutely. That's why I would consider Reiki spiritual and not religions, for example, because it actually open to everyone. Any religious background, any background in general, any skin color, men, women, it really doesn't matter. It's open to everyone. Everyone can learn how to do this.
And then how about...
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ellen.
Well, I was just going to make a couple of observations there related to the priesthood and differences and similarities, if we want to head that direction now, because that's one of the stark differences right there. That was very, I think, very forward thinking of the what was his name, Usui, the founder of Reiki, and being able to say that this is an inherent attribute of humans, male, female, religious or not, races, are not considered. It's all part of the energy system within human beings. And so I think that was very forward thinking of him as a founder. The parallel, of course, of going into the wilderness to fast for 21 days parallels Jesus and his 40 days in the desert. And this decentralized is one of the really important stark differences. Also, the decentralized nature of Reiki, that once you're a master, you can attune others, and it becomes this network of people who can trace their lineage back to the founder. Mm-hmm. Whereas with Mormonism and the priesthood, it's very much kept in a institutional focused kind of permission slip, where you have our authority, you have our permission to use this authority. It can be taken by the institution for behavior or other things, which and priesthood wasn't available. As Gabe mentioned, some women maybe practice in the early church, but priesthood was not available to like African American or Black people or indigenous people until the 1970s, when it became just too much of a social kind of, well, a believer would say this is when revelation was received that it was going to be expansive to those other people. But I find it so fascinating that Reiki started in that space of all people are welcome to this energy. It's an inherent part of us as humans.
Yeah, and one of the, correct me if I'm wrong, but you technically don't need to be attuned to Reiki to do Reiki on yourself. I mean, I was looking at some of these protocols in cancer treatment centers where like they will teach the individual how to do Reiki themselves. So it's, again, there's not necessarily this gatekeeping, but there's still this belief that even if you're not attuned, like, yeah, you still have access to this.
Yeah. So how I was taught, even for the first level, you get an attunement, which is also very healing for you. So is really enhancing. You feel different after it. But yeah, as I was saying earlier, I think we have all this ability, and as more as we will progress, I think we will find our own way to do it. And I do believe there are people that don't need any attunement to be able to channel energy through them. This is is one modality, and this is how they taught me. But I'm sure, yeah, everyone has this ability, even without being attuned.
And then how about the energy exchange, just like finance? So one of the big kind of it's an interesting dynamic in Mormonism that in the Book of Mormon, they decry what they define as priestcraft, which is doing spiritual things for money. So there's this feeling, this teaching within Mormonism and kind of this ethos within the culture that, doing things for gain, spiritual things for gain is corruption, that's not allowed. And so, this causes, it's very interesting because on the one hand, this is very much the culture of Mormonism, and that people are asked to do huge callings, being the bishop or the stake president, where they're committing hours and hours to running these local congregations on top of having large families and having jobs. And this is the sign of their faith and their diligence, is to do this without getting paid. While on the other hand, the church itself very much emphasizes tithing as being, one of the key things for whether you can go into the temple and like whether you'll gain salvation. And that's come under fire recently, that the church has, maybe an estimated like $250 billion. So it's this odd contrast. So there's this culture in Mormonism that there's guilt and over mixing religious practice with money. And I think this has come up a bit because energy healing is somewhat prominent within Mormonism, I think owing to its mystical roots. And a few years back, it became a bit of an issue where the leadership of the church put out a statement kind of condemning energy healing, saying like, if people promise you, miracles, if people promise you miracles for money, be cautious. And that was a bit of a controversy because there's a lot of faithful Mormons that also this was their career, their job. And one of the most prominent ones just left the church. Just now she left the church a few months ago. So anyway, yeah. What's the, do people do this for money? Does it cost to get attuned?
Yeah. So this is, I think, a topic that is valid not just for Mormonism, but for any religion, because money is really considered evil. So, yeah, the way I think about it, and many other practitioners think about it, is, money is just energy as well, and it's an exchange of energy. So this is a way that humans developed to exchange services. We could do it in other ways as well. Money is just what we decide to use, is a made up way of exchange energy. And this is how I see it. So to me, money are not bad in itself. Depends on the intention and the use that you make it. And also, I think many people they're seeing, people in power with a lot of money, and they say, oh well, when I will if I will get all that money, then I will become like them. And I don't want to become like that, because your ego will become louder and you will want to dominate other people. But what I find, at least in myself, when I have more money, I become more generous. It expands already who you are. So actually, giving money to people that do good for others, that are doing energy healing, helping people in whatever way, I think it will actually, it will give them more power to do even better. So this is what I think about money. And if you do it, you don't have to do Reiki as a main job. And of course, you can decide not to get paid for it. But I don't think there is anything bad in doing Reiki or any energy healing or any holistic practices and get paid for it. I think this is a very religious belief, and rooted also in scarcity, because we think that if we get more money, someone else will have less. But this is maybe it's a topic for another time. But I think there is infinite amount of energy, because everything is energy, and money is just energy too. So we could have an infinite amount of money if everyone would believe this as well.
And I think it comes down to, kind of comes back to this core wound within Judeo-Christian culture that we talked about previously, of just this fallen man, this kind of distrust for yourself, that you're nothing, you need to be saved, you are sinful. And so there's this dichotomy of like people either on the one hand that like, oh, I shouldn't want money for this, I should just sacrifice and do all, or they swing to the other side and they get this kind of extreme prosperity mindset of like, if I am righteous, I'm going to get all the money, and like there should be no limit. And if anybody says anything different, that's their scarcity mindset. And like, I deserve this and I don't have to do anything to, there's this unhealthy pursuit of it as well. I think Mormons, a lot of people struggle with finding the balance in between this black and white thinking.
Yeah. One thing that helped me is seeing money as a vote. Like, you vote for the experience or the thing that you want. And so if you want to experience healing or whatever other thing you want, you can give money. And this is, the reality that you are creating with your vote.
Yeah.
I could just jump in there real quick on the money topic, because one way that I see it also, I like what you said, Vale, the vote, is that it's systematized karmic energy. Like it is energy, and it's a karma kind of interaction also. It's like if your focus is on the money for what you're doing, then maybe you'll see the money as what you're doing. But if your focus is on the people that you're healing, and money is an outcome of it that sustains you and allows you to heal more people, then it's more of just an avenue, a channel for karma, since money is it's a fungible exchange. Before we had money, we just bartered with things. And how would I know if 3 pieces of your silver are equal to my, loaf of bread or whatever it is? But that fungible nature of money allows us to commoditize and
Yeah. No, totally.
karma.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, if you, as I see it, if you are in your dharma, if you are in your purpose, and you do it for your highest good and the highest good of all involved, you will receive back from the universe, as a reward, money. But money, again, is energy that is coming from people, but is not the people that is giving you energy, is giving you money, is the universe that is rewarding you, and this is a way you can get it, for example.
So I wanted to read just a couple of things, as we kind of wrap up. I still want to get to some of the evidence for Reiki, but I guess circling back to the priesthood in Mormonism, and I guess the meta narrative here is, from my perspective, is that the Mormon perspective of the priesthood is one interpretation, one model of an underlying reality. And with Reiki, you see another interpretation of it. And so I don't think Reiki is the truth, or that it's really that, or one thing or the other, because as you mentioned, there's multiple different ways to describe this. And I think that I guess we can kind of summarize the similarities and differences. I mean, what I see with Reiki that I think is really healthy and I respect is that it is, I would say, construct aware. It recognizes that itself is only a packaging of something underlying. It's religious and belief system agnostic. You can practice Reiki and be a Catholic, a Mormon, or any, it really actually depends on what the beliefs of that system, whether they'll let you in and practice that, which, some of these systems will view Reiki as evil or power of the devil or whatever. But that incompatibility isn't coming from Reiki's side, because it is pretty, it's not claiming really anything. It's not claiming any authority, not gatekeeping that you have to have this. It's like, hey, this is one system, one model. But yeah, there's a lot of similarities in the aspect of this idea that you're channeling this power in both, and it's dependent on you as a channel and dependent on the recipient. Similar with priesthood blessings, where like you got to keep yourself clean and worthy, and the belief of the person also is a limiting factor. There's this worthiness aspect of it, where it's not necessarily worthiness with Reiki, but you are counseled to do certain things, or certain kind of dietary and practices before attunement that you are recommended to follow. But there's variations amongst people. There's these different orders or levels of it. There's this attunement process, which is very similar to ordination. And my experience with that. So Vale, you attuned me for levels 1 and 2, and it was a very powerful, spiritual, moving experience, because for me it was this kind of full circle, or maybe coming full circle from being in Mormonism, being fully in, believing, and then leaving and just not believing anything, and then coming back around and overhauling my paradigm and being open-minded and holding things loosely and seeing the truth in things and realizing that these are all models, perspectives, pointers at the truth and not the truth themselves. And so it was really beautiful and moving to, have come from a very patriarchal organization where, in Mormonism, there's been this history of women, women were giving blessings. Women were using seer stones in the late 1800s to locate lost people and to locate lost livestock. And that was shut down because the priesthood authorities, this was a threat to the priesthood authority because these women didn't have priesthood authority. And so that all went largely by the wayside. And there's this movement within Mormonism, ordain women, where this call, I don't know, a decade or so, several years ago, I haven't heard much about it recently, where Kate Kelly, a Mormon woman, started a movement towards let's ordain women. And she ultimately got excommunicated from the church because of that. And yet the church has done little things that I view as kind of throwing little morsels towards women, in that now women can pray in general conference as of several years ago, which is it's a minor thing. Most people didn't even realize that they couldn't. Or they can witness the baptismal ordinance, basically just look at somebody being baptized and say yes or no, whether they went fully under the water. And so it's a big sticking point for or difficulty that a lot of women have in the church, that they pull a lot of the weight with these large families, but the church is largely run by men, and men have this authority. And so it was nice to kind of be on the other side of that, and having a woman attune, ordain me to something that was outside of a centralized authority, and wasn't gatekeeping. I don't practice Reiki that often. I do it from time to time with the kids or whatnot, but it's just kind of a tool in the toolbox that fits in with my beliefs. And so, there's a lot of similarities. I was going to read a couple things from the post, our episode 2, that just talks about other connections with the priesthood and other esoteric traditions. My main summary on it is the priesthood, the principle of the priesthood, a power that allows one to heal through the laying on of hands restored to the church by mystical experience with heavenly messengers, parallels the practice of Reiki, another method of healing through one's hands. This is especially true when you consider that it was acceptable for Mormon women to practice healing and blessings in the early church. Reiki involves using life force energy and was developed into a practice by Mikao Usui in 1922 when he had a mystical experience after 21 days of meditating and fasting. Reiki practitioners attune other practitioners who are often given a lineage back to Usui, similar to lineages given with priesthood ordinations. Even the Mormon priesthood, being named after Melchizedek, invokes the esoteric and Gnostic importance placed on Melchizedek, who appears in Gnostic texts and is viewed as Hermes Trismegistus, Thoth, or even Christ, depending on the tradition. Another bullet point I had here was that the Mormonism's belief in scriptures about Melchizedek and Enoch correlate with the appearance of two significant figures in esoteric and New Age beliefs and writings. So the higher priesthood in Mormonism is called the Melchizedek priesthood. Mormonism involves ordinances for the dead performed in temples, a temple endowment, and claims authority through the Melchizedek priesthood. And then I talk about how in the 1700s, Peter Whitmer, the father of Book of Mormon witnesses David and John, Whitmer lived in Ephrata, Pennsylvania, near the Zionitic Brethren, and those were a group practicing Rosicrucianism, an esoteric form of Christianity. And among the things they were doing, baptisms for the dead, kind of having a temple, maybe psychedelic drink. But they, in 1740, the leader of the commune, quote, solemnly consecrated brothers to the priesthood by the laying on of hands, after which they were admitted to that ancient order of Melchizedek. And so there's just, it's not just Reiki. There is a lot of support for the fact that, these ideas, aren't unique to Mormonism. And I think it's pretty certain that Mikao Usui wasn't copying off of Joseph Smith's notes when he was doing his thing. And I think one of the importances when we see these parallels between different traditions is being open to not just like a horizontal transmission that like, oh, this person copied their ideas from Plato or this. There is that going on, but there's also, if you're open to it, you'll see all of these connections where Reiki and the Melchizedek priesthood, all these other things are actually people kind of describing, these perfect forms like that Plato talked about, this underlying truth of reality. They're using their own words to describe it. Even you're talking about chi or prana in Mormonism. The parallel to that would be the light of Christ. People in Mormonism, they get the gift of the Holy Ghost after they're baptized, which is like this companion of the Spirit teaching them things. But they also teach that even if you haven't gotten that, there's what's called the light of Christ, which is this inner intuition that can lead people to kind of bootstrap the process so that they can join the Mormon church and then get the full package. But it's the same sort of thing, that there's an inherent essence out there that we all have access to. So yeah, any thoughts on that before I had a couple things to talk about on the evidence side of this, which I find is the most fascinating thing as a dentist, and dentistry and medicine really focuses on evidence-based medicine, evidence-based dentistry. That like, okay, people are skeptical of these things. Let's get the proof. Any thoughts before I share some things on that?
What I would say is, if people are curious or they want to compare it to, for example, Mormonism, just try it. Try it for themselves so they can actually experience it, and then they can, even without any scientific research, they can know if it's the same thing or not.
Yep.
Which is also what that section, sorry to cut you off again, Gabe, but that section of the Book of Mormon that you read effectively says the same thing. If you want to know that this is true, try it yourself. Take those steps, take that action, see what the feelings that follow are. And before we dig into the research a little bit more, one question I had for you, Vale, is in my experience with priesthood, which I was ordained at the age of 12 to the Aaronic priesthood and then the Melchizedek priesthood before I served a 2-year mission, which was when I was around 19. So one thing that it functions as in this kind of order of things for young men in particular is that the requirement to practice and use the priesthood is that you follow these particular rules or commandments, that you keep yourself, quote unquote, worthy, which of course includes commandments related to chastity or the way that you conduct yourself. And for me, it was very much like this kind of wrestling match, my worthiness, my ability to do these things. And yet every Sunday when I was participating in the sacrament, which is the communion or sharing of bread and water with the congregation that's blessed by these young men, by these priesthood holders, it kind of becomes this ongoing narrative of, am I worthy? There's a lot of those questions that come up, and it can be quite painful to deal with the shame, with the guilt that is wrapped up in all of that. My question ultimately is, do you feel like with Reiki that there's this kind of maybe it's like accountability to yourself, that your channels are kept clear so that you can function as a vessel for healing others?
Yeah, For Reiki, there is no punishment if you don't, fast or eat healthily or whatever other thing that can help you, keep your channel clean. The result is that you won't channel much, or it won't be as effective. So that's the main difference. So you are worthy regardless, but it's just there are some instructions for you to be most a service or most effective for yourself, and to heal yourself and the clients.
Thank you.
So, yeah, the one fascinating, I guess, a couple, differences between Reiki and the priesthood, where I think Reiki beats out the priesthood, is that one, with Reiki, you can do distance Reiki, that this principle, like energy, doesn't need to happen through space time. You can actually do distance Reiki, and you can do it in the future, in the past, which sounds totally bizarre, but it's funny because I was just listening to Donald Hoffman's interview on the Know Thyself podcast, and he was talking about the 2022 Physics Nobel Prize, which went to 3 physicists that proved that disproved local realism, which basically says that they have proof, and they got the Nobel Prize for this. I mean, this had been shown in experimental results for, I think, a few decades, but finally it was solid enough that, it was accepted and they got the prize. But the what they disproved was that local realism, meaning local, that interactions only happen through space and time, limited by the speed of light, and because things are around each other in space. And realism, meaning that things have properties and without, even if they're not measured. So their experiments showed that reality does not follow local realism. And that's accepted in science, which I think is incompatible with materialism. That's another discussion. But so what I'm saying is that even though this sounds bizarre, like, there is the foundation for it within science. So Reiki has that benefit, that you can be separated in space and time. And the second benefit is that there's evidence behind it. So, which I don't think there's any randomized control trials that were performed with Melchizedek or with priesthood, which I'm not to say that there's not power in the priesthood, which I think is the most helpful aspect of just taking a broader picture, is that you don't have to prove the priesthood true or false, or Reiki true or false, is that you realize that, yes, there is truth in these things. They're not necessarily what you may have initially thought. And so you sent me some things, and so I started going down this rabbit hole. So evidence in medicine and dentistry, essentially, there's been this shift away from just expert opinion of saying, doing things because we think it should work. And there's this tier of the quality of evidence. Like, we should do things that are proven to work. And there's different levels of quality. On the lowest is just expert opinion, because somebody says that this should work. That's still some level of evidence. And if you don't have anything else, sure, let's go with it. And then toward the top is these randomized control trials, where you have these trials where there's an experimental group and then a control group, so that you can see if there's a placebo effect or not. And both the individual and the experimenter, neither of them know which is the experiment, which is the control, until after the results are calculated. So there's not bias that way. But then even on top of that, so the highest level of evidence are systematic reviews or meta-analyses, are studies that look at all other studies. They have a specific criteria, so that they're only getting high levels of data that don't have much bias. And then they analyze, okay, we got all these studies. examining this treatment, and this number of them showed that there was a positive effect. This other number showed that there wasn't. And sometimes with meta-analysis, if it's a numerary, if it's something that they can quantify, then they'll say, okay, this is the effect overall from all these studies. So this is a systematic review of Reiki published in the Journal of Evidence-Based Complementary and Alternative Medicine in 2017. And the title is Reiki is Better Than Placebo and has broad potential as complementary health therapy. And so complementary meaning, like you talked about, Vale, is that this isn't something that like, oh, I've got cancer, I'm going to go cure it with Reiki. It's go see your doctor and get treatment from allopathic medicine. And in addition to it, it won't hurt to also try other things as well. And so this study they found 13 studies that met their criteria, and their criteria was that it had to be more than 20 participants in the Reiki treatment arm so that they could actually have statistical significance, that they had to have a placebo arm, and so that somebody was pretending to do Reiki on them, doing all the hand positions, but they were never attuned. So they never got ordained to Reiki. And then they had a control group that, nothing was happening. Some of these even had like another control group where the person was just listening to like relaxing meditative music. And so of those 13 studies, 8 demonstrated Reiki being more effective than placebo. 4 found no difference, but had questionable statistical resolving power, meaning like there might have been a difference, or maybe it did show a difference, but it wasn't statistical. And it may have not had enough participants to show that. And only 1 provided clear evidence for not providing benefit. So it says, viewed collectively, these studies provide reasonably strong support for Reiki being more effective than placebo. It says Reiki is a safe and gentle complementary therapy that activates the parasympathetic, so like the rest and digest nervous system, to heal body and mind. It has potential for broader use in management of chronic health conditions and possibly in postoperative recovery. Research is needed to optimize the delivery of Reiki. And so it gives a little bit of a history of this, talks about Usui. But I was just looking through some of these studies, and first, only the studies, their selection criteria, only studies that used hands-on Reiki were considered, so that they weren't looking at distance healing, and only quantitative studies that actually measured something, including a sham Reiki placebo control, were considered. So these sham Reiki involves an actor mimicking the hand positions and the other procedures, because there's some symbols involved in Reiki, used by the attuned Reiki practitioner. The only difference was that they didn't receive a Reiki attunement at some point previously. And so some of these studies were just really fascinating. 2 of the studies used rats as experimental recipients of Reiki. And these are actually really good studies because they were considered highly significant studies because they preclude the possibility of a psychological placebo effect. So it's not like the rat thinks, oh, I might be getting Reiki, so that's going to help me not suffer these effects. Even though they still used a sham Reiki placebo control. So they still had somebody pretending to do Reiki on these rats. And so, some of the both rats studies were interesting. So the one study, they were measuring heart rate and blood pressure in noise-stressed rats. Those metrics were measured, and the Reiki or sham Reiki was provided for 15 minutes per day over 5 days. And the Reiki, but not the sham Reiki, significantly reduced both the average resting heart rate and the rise in heart rate produced by the exposure of the rats to loud noise. And that didn't affect the arterial pressure, though. Another rat study did this.
Oh, hold on. Somewhere, you're telling me somewhere there's an actor who on their resume says, I carried out sham Reiki on a bunch of laboratory rats and it didn't work to lower their blood pressure. If that was on your resume, going places. That's cool.
Yeah. And then there was another Yeah, there's another study, again, using noise-induced stress in rats, and they were measuring the damage caused to tiny blood vessels in the mesentery of the rats, so their digestive tract. And so they were measuring something really objective. Again, 50 minutes of Reiki per day over 21 days. And it was replicated 3 times and then done again using different practitioners. And the extent of the stress associated microvascular damage for noise and Reiki was significantly less than noise and sham Reiki or the noise only control. So I think that's just fascinating. And I would be curious how somebody would explain that from a purely materialistic perspective, or saying that Reiki doesn't matter or that it's a placebo. Because, I mean, the difference between the Reiki and the sham Reiki are whether somebody was attuned and likely their belief systems, whether they believe in Reiki as a sham Reiki or a Reiki person. So yeah, some of the human trials, again, used a sham Reiki placebo, and then they had a control group that was relaxing and listening to a meditation tape, and then a control group that was listening to calming music. Reiki was more effective than placebo, music, or meditation for inducing physical relaxation. And but there was no difference between the mental relaxation. Yeah, there was one study using Reiki in healthcare professionals with burnout syndrome, and they measured heart rate variability, which is a measure of how regulated your nervous system is, body temperature, salivary flow rate, salivary cortisol levels. And the Reiki practitioner had 15 years of experience. It was a 30-minute session covering the eyes, ears, head, and chest. And a single session of Reiki increased heart rate variability, meaning that their nervous system was more regulated, and body temperature, but not salivary cortisol levels, indicating that Reiki shifts the autonomic balance towards parasympathetic dominance. So again, Reiki and sham Reiki, there was a significant difference. And yeah, blood pressure was decreased. And in this hypertensive patients, 3 treatment arms, one with Reiki, one with sham Reiki, and another that was just a control where they rested. And the blood pressure decreased in all 3 groups, but it was statistically significant differences. And the Reiki group had the greatest reduction in blood pressure, followed by the placebo and then by the control group. And so, yeah, just some fascinating stuff. And I mean, this goes beyond Reiki too. This whole idea of Eastern medicine and meridians. I went down that rabbit hole at one point, where there's studies out there showing that a specific point on your wrist that Chinese medicine says is a meridian point for your heart. Whether you had a magnet, depending on where you had the North Pole or the pointed on the magnet towards the heart or away from the heart, it had statistically significant changes in the person's brain waves and parasympathetic versus sympathetic activation. So again, there are plenty of studies out there, good studies that show something is going on, that supports these systems of belief that are not based in our typical materialistic perspective. It gives support to these spiritual concepts. So
That's cool.
yeah, I find it fascinating.
Yeah, thanks for reading that. And I can confirm in my own experience that it works also for animals and plants too. So
Yeah, my experience with Reiki is pretty limited, but I did have one remote breathwork session that was infused with Reiki, and I could during the session I was able to recall childhood memories that I haven't for decades, or even maybe never have really revisited that were very vivid. And I also had smells from my childhood come up during the Reiki session, which I have not smelled in decades, which were connected to those memories. And it was really powerful. Now, I don't know how much of it was for the breath work or the Reiki, or if it was just the combination of those working together. But that it was a really powerful
Amazing.
experience, and led to some healing and some breakthroughs afterward. The smells were interesting because I have of all of my senses, my sense of smell is probably my weakest, which is a blessing and a curse. Mm-hmm. But to have like really strong smells that I'm smelling is really uncommon for me. But in that Reiki session, the smells were really powerful. In just I don't know, memories of smells, really.
That's amazing. And this is what I was sharing also before. Whatever comes up at the moment is because it's ready to be released. So probably there was some healing to do with the memory in childhood. Something happened probably there. So it was ready to be healed. This I would interpret it. Yeah. And that's also why it's also difficult to say what the effect of Reiki will be, because it will be different for everyone. Someone will have memories coming up, some other emotions, some other like physical healing. So it's very different. And of course, if you combine it with meditation or breath work or other tools, it can be even more powerful.
Yeah, one last thing that I had thought of earlier that was interesting is, what you were talking about is that negative things or negative experiences were coming up, or not the ideal, but that was actually evidence of it working and part of the process, which is very different than Western medicine. All right, and if we talk about ego death too, it's very different than what we in culture, we try to postpone death as much as possible and go to great lengths to like keep people alive, even in vegetative states, or because we resist. And the medicine that we want the medicine to like dull things, and we don't want medicine that like makes things worse. But then you break through. And even I was listening to an episode of a podcast talking about how kind of CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy versus maybe psychoanalytic or psychodynamic therapy, more Freudian or Jungian, again, the switch to evidence-based medicine, we want things that work. We want it to work right away. And psychodynamic, psychoanalytic things, sometimes things get worse. You feel more anxiety, you feel more stress. Your life goes downhill, seems to go downhill. But in the long run, if you did those studies long enough, then they'd actually get to a better place. Whereas maybe CBT, not that it's bad, but it's just not always the solution that we need. Maybe it stabilizes things, but you don't get through to where you need to go. And we want studies that are shorter and less expensive, and insurance only wants to pay for things that we can prove work. And so there is a danger to seeking for the quick fix, to only associating positive feelings with confirmation that we're on the right path. And in Mormonism, this shows up too, where the fruits of the spirit, that's how you're supposed to be able to see if you're doing the right thing, is that you're supposed to feel peace and love and whatever. And if you feel bad about something, if you feel bad when you read some piece of anti-Mormon literature, if you feel bad when you drink coffee, like that's a sign that you're doing the wrong thing. And we don't realize that a lot of that's because we feel guilt, or that it's just very uncomfortable to have our beliefs challenged. And a friend had pointed out recently that if you actually look at the Revelations of Joseph Smith, the Doctrine and Covenants, there's several instances where he gets really chastised. These are things that he's kind of channeling. Again, from my perspective, he's channeling. I think there's some metaphysical aspect to it, some from his subconscious, some from maybe a universal unconscious. Some of those revelations are very severe chastisements from, allegedly, from Christ or from God. And I'm sure it didn't feel great to be called out on things. So we do have to question this idea that if we feel bad, then that's an answer that we're doing the wrong thing or going in the wrong direction. And we just need to, if we're doing the right thing, things should be better, should feel better right away.
Yeah, I love this. Thanks for saying that. I just want to add something related to Western medicine as you were saying this. Yeah, I think we tend to give, with Western medicine, we give the pill so we don't feel the pain anymore. But there is a pain for a reason, that your body is telling you something and you don't go on the root cause. So you just remove the symptoms, but you don't go to the root cause and actually heal the problem from the roots. Yeah, so that's what alternative medicine, holistic practices tend to do.
And it's not that there's not a place for that too. I mean, sometimes you need to stabilize and have a tool where you can just get by.
Absolutely.
I think of that allegory of the guy that comes to a village and they're just so occupied rescuing babies that keep floating down the river. One day a baby floated down the river, somebody saw it and they're like, oh my gosh, and they went and rescued the baby. And then more and more came, and then it occupies all their time, and all they're doing is rescuing these babies. And the guy says, why don't we go upstream and figure out what's causing this? And people are like, we don't have time. We're just rescuing all these babies. And there's also an aspect of it too, that if we didn't have the babies to rescue, like what would we be doing too? So sometimes we do things just because we need something to do. And so it's not that you don't rescue the babies, because that's the acute need, but you also realize that somehow you have to balance that and maybe get a little behind, get a little worse to actually go to the root cause and figure things out for what's causing the thing that you keep dealing with and coming up against over and over again in your life. So
yeah, I think of that analogy as taking place on the Nile River, and it was the Pharaoh upstream dumping the babies in, and there's really a good ending to that story. But just kidding.
So Vale, what do you? So you're a life coach now. You do distance Reiki. You've got tell a bit about what you do, how people can reach you.
Sure. Thanks. So, I'm a spiritual life coach, if we want to give a name to what I do. And I'm basically helping people discover who they are and what they came here to do, which is exactly my journey. So what I managed to understand, now I'm helping others do the same. And I use different tools that I learned in my coaching certification. I use Reiki, I use meditation. And I also do Reiki healing circles. Those are free, and I do them every couple of months. I try to do it more often. And I also help people. I teach people how to meditate, or this is usually for very beginners or people that tried and they couldn't find a way to make it consistent. So this is what I do. I have also a podcast called Stories of Awakening, where we share people's stories, because for me are the most powerful ways to see that there is hope, that people might be, might be in challenging situations, but they overcame them and they actually use them as a catalyst for their growth and evolution. And you can find me on Instagram at Soul Vale. I can give you the links and maybe you can put them in the show notes. I have a website, soulvale.com, and there are all the contacts there too.
And you also have a kind of a curriculum for your coaching program where you spend kind of different time in these different silos of, you talk about science and hard science and quantum physics. You talk about consciousness, the subconscious, and you've shared with me at least one meditation that you record specific meditations for your clients and mix them with binaural beats. You sent me an inner child healing one, which was really powerful and moving. So I'd recommend anybody looking to kind of change their life and learn more about these things in a comprehensive way from an empowered feminine coach, that reach out to you. So we'll put those things in the show notes. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I want to second that, Vale. That it's been excellent talking to you. Your podcast is great. That's Stories of Awakening. And you can find that on Apple Podcasts, or is it on Spotify also?
Spotify, and now on YouTube as well.
YouTube. Excellent. It's been great listening to you share your experience and your knowledge of Reiki. And I wish you so much success as you help people heal.
Thank you so much. And thank you guys for everything you do.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.